John and Monique lived in a grand mansion nestled in the most exclusive neighborhood of the city. Behind towering iron gates, a cobblestone driveway led to the sprawling estate, surrounded by meticulously trimmed gardens and a sparkling fountain in the center. The morning sun streamed through massive glass windows, casting a golden glow across the elegant living room, adorned with artwork lined walls, a pristine leather sofa, and a grand piano stationed near the fireplace. John embodied success. Tall and charismatic, his warm smile reflected his genuine kindness. He had built his empire from scratch, a testament to his relentless determination and integrity. Yet his greatest pride wasn't his wealth or accomplishments. It was Monique. His love for her was unwavering, and he spared no effort in showering her with affection. Expensive jewelry, spontaneous vacations to exotic destinations, and endless words of praise. John believed that Monique deserved nothing less than the best. Monique, a vision of sophistication and beauty, was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went. Her designer dresses hugged her figure perfectly, and her captivating eyes spoke volumes before she even uttered a word. But beneath the glamorous exterior lay a heart driven by ambition and a mind teeming with calculation. Monique didn't love John with the same fervor he loved her. To her, he was a means to an end, the key to a life of luxury she had always dreamed of. She played the role of a devoted wife flawlessly, but her loyalty was far from genuine. In the shadows of their seemingly perfect marriage was a dangerous secret. Monique was entangled in an affair with Daniel, John's best friend. Daniel was charming and confident, with a daring edge that made him irresistible to Monique. Their clandestine meetings, hidden behind closed doors, fueled her growing disdain for John's unassuming nature. To her, John's unwavering trust and kindness were weaknesses, opportunities to manipulate. John, blinded by love, remained oblivious to Monique's deceit. In his eyes, she was his everything, the reason he worked tirelessly, the person he built this life for. His devotion made him vulnerable, leaving him unaware of the storm brewing within his own home. Monique often sighed theatrically as she walked through the house, letting her frustration show in exaggerated gestures. "This place is too big for just me to manage," she lamented one evening as John returned home, loosening his tie after another long day. "I need help, John. The cleaning, the organizing, it's just too much." John, ever the accommodating husband, immediately nodded. "Of course, Monique. I'll arrange for someone to assist you. You shouldn't have to lift a finger." His tone was gentle, as if the thought of her discomfort was unbearable to him. But Monique had a plan already brewing. A conventional housekeeper was too risky. She couldn't risk someone overhearing the hushed conversations, the stolen phone calls, or the occasional meetings with Daniel when John was away. Her suggestion was carefully crafted, almost innocent. "I heard of someone through a friend, a young woman named Camille. She's skilled, quiet, and—" Monique paused, her voice lowering as if revealing a secret. "She's deaf. It might be perfect, no misunderstandings, no awkwardness." John hesitated. "Deaf," he repeated, frowning slightly. "Wouldn't that make things harder for her?" "Not at all," Monique reassured him with a sweet smile. "It'll make things easier for us. She won't be distracted or need constant instructions. Just trust me, John. She's the right choice." Reluctantly, John agreed, as he always did when it came to Monique's wishes. A week later, Camille arrived. She was a slender, pale young woman in her early 20s, with soft, delicate features framed by waves of light brown hair. Her wide, perceptive eyes scanned the grand estate as she stepped through the front door, taking in every detail. Though she couldn't hear the sound of the heavy door closing behind her, her movements were fluid, her demeanor composed. Monique welcomed her with a carefully measured warmth. "You'll be cleaning, organizing, and helping where needed," she explained, her words exaggerated and her gestures deliberate to ensure Camille understood. Camille nodded politely, her hands resting in front of her in a quiet, almost deferential posture. What Monique didn't notice, or perhaps chose to ignore, was the sharpness in Camille's gaze. Though silent, her eyes seemed to absorb everything, every corner of the lavish house, every flicker of expression on Monique's face. Monique quickly grew comfortable with Camille's presence. Her silence was a reassurance, a guarantee that nothing spoken within these walls would ever leave them. Monique began to move more freely, her conversations with Daniel becoming less guarded. After all, what could Camille possibly comprehend? She lived in a world without sound, a world Monique believed was blind to her secrets. Camille, meanwhile, went about her tasks with quiet efficiency, dusting the grand staircase, arranging the polished silverware, and folding the expensive linens. She blended seamlessly into the household. But behind her calm exterior, Camille was always watching, always noticing. One afternoon, the house was unusually quiet. John had left early for a meeting across town, and Camille was dusting the edges of a polished oak table in the grand living room. The sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting every immaculate detail of the space. It was a room designed to impress, a sanctuary of wealth and status. As Camille worked, the faint vibration of the front door opening caught her attention. She turned her head just slightly, enough to notice Monique entering, followed closely by Daniel. They were laughing softly, their voices muted to Camille's world, but their body language speaking volumes. Monique's posture was relaxed, her smile uninhibited in a way Camille had never seen when John was around. Camille continued her task, pretending not to notice as they settled on the plush sofa. But then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it. Monique leaned in, her lips meeting Daniel's in an intimate kiss. Camille's hand froze mid-motion, her cloth hovering over the table's gleaming surface. Though she couldn't hear their whispers or the soft laugh that likely followed, the scene before her felt loud. The tension between them was unmistakable, their stolen moment of affection revealing a secret neither seemed concerned about hiding. Monique glanced over her shoulder briefly, but seeing Camille's back turned, she seemed unfazed. Camille resumed her cleaning, though her mind raced. The kiss alone was a revelation, but it was Monique's expression afterward that lingered in Camille's thoughts, part excitement, part fear, as though she knew the weight of her betrayal, but couldn't resist indulging in it. In the days that followed, Camille began to notice more. Monique and Daniel's interactions, once subtle, seemed bolder in the spaces where they believed themselves unseen or unheard. A lingering hand on Monique's shoulder, a conspiratorial smile exchanged across the room, a shared glance that spoke of things Camille could only guess at. They never lowered their voices around her, confident in her inability to hear their words. Camille would often pass through the kitchen while Monique and Daniel stood close together, their heads bent as if plotting. She would glance briefly at their expressions, animated, sometimes tense, and then look away, returning to her tasks. Monique, ever the actor, maintained her facade of the perfect wife when John was present. Her laughter was light, her touch affectionate, but Camille now recognized the subtle cues of discomfort when John embraced her or spoke of their future. For Camille, these moments weren't just observations. They were pieces of a puzzle she didn't yet understand. Though Monique and Daniel's affair was clear, there was something deeper, darker in the way their conversations seemed urgent, their movements deliberate. Camille couldn't hear their secrets, but she could see them in every stolen glance and hidden smile. She began to wonder, what else were they hiding? One morning, as the sunlight filtered through the sprawling mansion, Camille was tidying the kitchen, methodically wiping the countertops and arranging the utensils. Monique's voice echoed faintly in the distance, a tone Camille recognized as cheerful, almost rehearsed. John had just finished breakfast and retreated to his study, leaving Monique alone in the kitchen with Camille. Camille paused as Monique moved toward the counter, a small glass vial in her hand. The vial was filled with a fine white powder. Camille watched discreetly, her hands busy stacking dishes, as Monique opened the vial and carefully tapped its contents into a glass of orange juice. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and entirely unhurried. Just a little something to keep him healthy, Monique muttered aloud, more to herself than anyone else, her lips curving into a smile. She stirred the juice, the spoon clinking softly against the glass, and carried it out of the kitchen to where John was working. Camille's hands tightened on the edge of the sink. Her mind raced, though she showed no outward reaction. Monique's calm demeanor suggested this wasn't the first time she had added something special to John's drink. Over the following days, Camille began to notice subtle changes in John. The man who once exuded strength and energy now appeared pale and lethargic. His steps were slower, his posture slumped. He often massaged his temples as though fighting off a constant headache. "It's the stress," Monique would say with a sigh, placing another glass of supplements in front of him. "You work too hard, John. You should take it easy." John, ever trusting, would smile weakly and drink without question. Camille, however, wasn't convinced. She began to observe more closely, her sharp eyes catching the moments when Monique would quietly retrieve the vial from a hidden spot in the pantry or smile to herself as John's condition visibly worsened. One afternoon, as Camille dusted Monique's study, she noticed a folder partially tucked under a stack of magazines. The corner of a piece of paper caught her attention. Without hesitation, she pulled it free and unfolded it. Her breath caught. Scrawled across the page were detailed notes. Increase dosage gradually. Symptoms, fatigue, weakness, must appear natural. And most chillingly, no suspicion, death must seem accidental. The implications were clear. This wasn't about John's health. It was a calculated plan to slowly poison him, to erode his strength until his body gave out entirely. Camille's hands trembled as she folded the paper back into the folder. Her mind raced with questions. Why would Monique do this? Was it just about the money? And how much time did John have before it was too late? That night, as Camille lay in her small, sparsely furnished room, the weight of what she had discovered pressed down on her. She couldn't hear the world around her, but the images replaying in her mind were deafening. Monique's calm, John's trust, and the vial of white powder. All of it point to one horrifying truth. Camille didn't know how to act, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't let this happen. Late one evening, under the dim light of a street lamp outside a small cafe, Camille sat across from Ethan. The quiet hum of the city provided a backdrop to their meeting, but Camille was entirely focused on her hands, signing furiously as her thoughts spilled out. Her gestures were precise yet frantic, her wide eyes filled with urgency. Ethan, a sharp-looking man in his early 30s with glasses perched on his nose, watched intently. A childhood friend who had always been fascinated by technology, Ethan had become a skilled engineer, specializing in surveillance equipment and communications. Though it had been years since he and Camille had seen each other, her sudden message pleading for his help had brought him here without hesitation. Camille's hands moved quickly, recounting everything she had seen. Monique's strange behavior, the vial of white powder, John's declining health, and the chilling notes she had discovered. Ethan nodded along, his brows furrowed as he pieced together the gravity of the situation. When she finally stopped, her hands trembling slightly, Ethan leaned back in his chair. "This is serious," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're saying she's poisoning him, and she thinks you don't know because you can't hear them talking?" Camille nodded, her gaze fixed on Ethan, pleading silently for him to understand. Her hands moved again, signing, "I don't have proof. They think I don't notice anything. I need to show what's really happening." Ethan took a deep breath, his mind already working through possibilities. "Okay," he said, leaning forward. "We need evidence. Solid evidence. Something undeniable. If Monique and this guy, what's his name?" "Daniel," Camille signed. "If Monique and Daniel are careless enough to talk freely around you, then we can use that to your advantage." Camille tilted her head slightly, questioning. Ethan smiled faintly, already reaching for his bag. "You're going to become their worst nightmare." From the bag, Ethan pulled out a small case and opened it, revealing a sleek, button-sized camera and an equally discreet recording device. "These are state-of-the-art," he explained, holding up the camera. "This one clips right onto your clothes, completely unnoticeable. It'll capture everything in high definition. And this," he said, holding up the recording device, "is a compact audio recorder. It's sensitive enough to pick up a whisper from across the room." Camille's eyes widened as she examined the tiny devices. Ethan continued, his tone serious. "They think you're harmless. That's your strength. They'll talk openly around you, and you'll catch every word, every move." Camille nodded firmly, her fear replaced by determination. She began signing. "What if they find out? What if they realize?" "They won't," Ethan interrupted. "You'll be careful, and if anything happens, I'll be just a call away." He leaned back, watching her carefully. "Camille, you're brave to do this. Most people wouldn't dare, but we'll get the truth, and we'll protect John, I promise." As they parted ways, Camille's fingers brushed against the small devices now hidden in her coat pocket. For the first time since she had discovered Monique's dark intentions, she felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. Camille returned to the mansion the next day, her demeanor as calm and composed as ever. The tiny devices Ethan had given her, a camera discreetly clipped inside her blouse and a recorder tucked into the pocket of her apron, were now her silent allies. She moved through her tasks methodically, her sharp eyes and steady hands betraying none of the tension boiling beneath the surface. The first opportunity came that very afternoon. Monique and Daniel were seated in the living room, their voices carrying through the open space. Camille knelt by the coffee table, polishing its already gleaming surface, her body angled just enough to capture them on camera. "John's been looking worse," Daniel said, his tone low but audible. He leaned back, his arm resting casually along the top of the sofa. "How much longer are we going to drag this out?" Monique crossed her legs, a smug smile playing on her lips. "It has to be gradual," she replied, swirling the wine in her glass. "If he drops dead too quickly, people will start asking questions. We keep it subtle, just a little more of the powder every few days. Soon enough, he'll be too weak to notice anything." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "You're ruthless." Monique leaned closer to him, her smile widening. "It's not ruthless, it's practical, and once it's done," she trailed off, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction. Camille's hands worked rhythmically, dusting the table, her head slightly tilted as if focusing on her task. In reality, her heart raced as she ensured the recorder picked up every word. Her camera captured their relaxed, conspiratorial postures, the way Monique's confidence oozed from her every gesture. The next morning, Camille's silent vigilance paid off again. She was in the kitchen when Monique entered, holding the now familiar vial of white powder. Camille's movements slowed as she reached for a cloth to wipe the counters, her eyes discreetly following Monique's every move. Monique poured the powder into a glass of water, stirring it with an air of casual indifference. "You should see him this morning," she said, her voice light and almost amused. "He could barely stand up. Soon he won't be able to leave the bed." Daniel, lounging by the kitchen island, laughed. "Good. That'll make things easier when the time comes." Camille adjusted her stance, making sure the camera hidden in her blouse had a clear view of Monique's hands as she stirred the drink. Monique turned to Daniel, her grin unguarded. "It's almost too easy." Camille's stomach churned, but she kept her expression blank, her hands continuing their meticulous cleaning. She waited until Monique left the room, carrying the poisoned drink to John, before exhaling quietly. The footage would be damning. Monique, caught red-handed, preparing the very thing that was slowly killing her husband. Later that evening, Camille stumbled upon something even more sinister. While cleaning Monique's study, she noticed a document lying on the desk, partially concealed by a folder. With cautious movements, she slid the paper free and unfolded it. It was a will, signed, dated, and naming Monique as the sole beneficiary of John's estate. Camille's fingers trembled as she read further. The signature at the bottom looked authentic, but the details didn't match what she knew of John. This wasn't his writing. It was forged. Her camera recorded every detail as she carefully replaced the paper and stepped back, her heart pounding. The pieces were falling into place. Monique wasn't just poisoning John. She was planning to claim everything he owned once he was gone. Over the next few days, Camille captured more. Conversations between Monique and Daniel grew bolder, with Daniel casually discussing how they would celebrate once John was out of the picture. Monique laughed, her tone laced with mockery as she imitated John's weakened voice. "It's almost pathetic," she said, smirking. "The man doesn't even question it. He trusts me completely." Camille recorded every word, every smirk, every damning action. Her quiet presence continued to fade into the background, just as Monique and Daniel had always believed it would. But with each passing moment, her resolve grew stronger. She couldn't stop the poison coursing through John's body, but she could ensure that the truth would be undeniable when the time came. Monique and Daniel believed they were untouchable, but Camille's silent watchfulness was about to shatter their carefully constructed facade. Monique had always prided herself on her ability to read people. It was part of what made her so good at manipulation, her knack for knowing what others were thinking without them saying a word. But lately, something about Camille unsettled her. It was subtle at first. Camille's eyes lingered just a moment too long when Monique entered the room. Her gaze wasn't deferential like it had been in the beginning, but sharper, curious, even questioning. Monique caught Camille watching her one evening as she adjusted her makeup in the grand mirror of the dining room. Their eyes met for a split second, and though Camille quickly looked away, Monique's stomach twisted in discomfort. "She's just odd," Monique muttered to herself later that night, pacing in her room. "It's nothing." But as the days passed, the feeling grew. Camille moved through the house with the same quiet efficiency as always, but Monique felt those watchful eyes trailing her more frequently. The girl wasn't staring outright, but Monique couldn't shake the sense that Camille was paying attention to things she shouldn't. Still, Monique brushed off her unease. "She's deaf," she told Daniel during one of their secret meetings in the living room. "Even if she's watching, what can she possibly know? She can't hear us." Daniel chuckled dismissively. "Exactly. She's harmless. You're overthinking it." Monique nodded, letting his reassurance soothe her nerves. Camille was just a maid, after all, a deaf girl with no way to understand what she saw. There was no reason to worry. Yet, as she returned to her schemes, Monique couldn't quite shake the feeling that Camille's silence wasn't as simple as it seemed. John sat in his study, his hand trembling as he reached for the glass of water Monique had placed beside him. The once vibrant man now felt like a shadow of himself. His muscles ached, his chest tightened with every breath, and a dull headache seemed to follow him everywhere. "It's just stress," Monique said soothingly as she entered the room, her tone laced with feigned concern. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her fingers lingering a moment too long. "You've been working too hard, love, but don't worry, the supplements I've been giving you will help." John looked up at her with tired eyes, his trust unwavering. "I don't know, Monique. I've never felt like this before. It's not just exhaustion. Something feels off." Monique crouched down, her perfectly polished nails brushing against his cheek as she forced a tender smile. "You need to trust me, John. You've always worked yourself to the bone, and now it's catching up with you. Let me take care of you." He nodded weakly, sipping from the glass she handed him, unaware of the faint smirk that flickered across her face as she stood to leave. From the hallway, Camille watched silently. Her heart sank deeper every time she saw John's condition worsen. His pallor was unmistakable, his movements sluggish and labored. She knew exactly why he was deteriorating, and yet she was powerless to stop it directly. Monique's control over the household was suffocating, and the burden of knowing the truth weighed heavily on Camille's shoulders. That evening, Monique and Daniel met in the sitting room, speaking in hushed tones Camille couldn't hear, but could capture on her hidden devices. This time, she moved closer than usual, her hands steady as she dusted the bookshelves just a few feet away. "John's health is declining faster than I expected," Monique said, her voice smooth and matter-of-fact. "But it's still not enough. People need to see it as gradual. If we up the dose just slightly, he won't last another month." Daniel leaned forward, his tone laced with impatience. "And what if someone starts asking questions? You know how paranoid rich people are about health these days." Monique rolled her eyes. "No one will suspect a thing. He's always been the overworked businessman. Stress, fatigue, it'll look completely natural. Besides, who would dare accuse me? He adores me." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "You're ice cold, you know that?" Camille gripped the duster in her hand, her knuckles white as she processed their words. It wasn't just the poisoning anymore. They were accelerating it. The time to act was slipping away, and John's life was hanging by a thread. That night, Camille sat in her room, her mind racing. She had already collected damning evidence, but would it be enough? John was deteriorating too quickly, and the fear of losing him outweighed the risks. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she sent a message to Ethan. It was time to push forward, time to expose Monique and Daniel for what they truly were. There was no turning back. Late one evening, as the house fell silent and Monique retired to her room, Camille made her way to the kitchen where Ethan was waiting, his laptop open on the countertop. The tension between them was palpable as they reviewed the videos and audio recordings Camille had captured over the past weeks. Ethan's face was set with determination as he copied the files onto a secure drive. "This has to be enough," Ethan said, glancing at Camille. "The video of her pouring the powder, their conversations about increasing the dose, it's all here. John won't be able to deny it." Camille nodded, her expression firm but tinged with worry. She signed. "He loves her so much. What if he refuses to believe it?" Ethan hesitated, then replied softly, "He might, but when the truth is staring him in the face, even love has its limits." The next morning, while Monique was out running errands, Ethan and Camille approached John in his study. John looked up from his desk, his face weary but welcoming. "Camille," he said, his voice kind despite his exhaustion. "And you must be Ethan? What's this about?" Ethan placed the laptop on the desk and opened a file. "Mr. Thornton, there's something you need to see." John frowned, his gaze shifting between Ethan and Camille. "What's going on here?" Ethan pressed play. The first video showed Monique in the kitchen, her back to the camera as she poured the powder into a glass of water. John's expression darkened, his brow furrowing as the audio played. Monique's voice, casual and unbothered. "It's almost too easy." John's face flushed with disbelief. What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You're accusing Monique of poisoning me?" Ethan held his ground. "It's not just this. There's more." He clicked through to the next video. Monique and Daniel sitting in the living room, their conversation chilling in its casualness. "We'll up the dose," Monique said. "Soon he won't be able to leave the bed." John's hands gripped the edge of the desk as he watched. This can't be real. You fabricated this." Camille stepped forward, her movements urgent as she signed. "She's lying to you. She's been poisoning you for months. Look at how you've been feeling. Look at the changes in your body." John stared at her, his face a mixture of anger and hurt. "You, Camille? I trusted you. I trusted her. This can't be true." Ethan, his voice calm but firm, opened one final file, a close-up video of the forged will. Monique's handwriting was unmistakable, her signature precise but damning. "This is her plan, Mr. Thornton. Poison you, take everything, and move on with Daniel. It's all right here." John sat back, his face pale. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes darted across the screen as the pieces fell into place. He thought of the strange taste in his drinks, the increasing fatigue, and the whispered conversations Monique thought he couldn't hear. Slowly, his hands relaxed, and his expression shifted from denial to cold realization. "She's been killing me," he whispered, his voice breaking. Ethan nodded. "Yes, but now you know, and we can stop her." John's gaze hardened, his jaw tightening as a fire reignited in his weary eyes. "She won't get away with this. Not anymore." The grand hall of the mansion buzzed with conversation and laughter as guests mingled, glasses of champagne clinking under the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. John had spared no expense for the evening, ensuring the party appeared like any other celebration of his success. Monique, radiant in an elegant gown, moved through the crowd with her usual grace, her laughter echoing softly as she charmed everyone around her. Beside her, Daniel blended into the background, ever the discreet accomplice. As the evening progressed, John tapped a glass to gather attention. The room fell silent, the crowd turning toward him with smiles and polite curiosity. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "There's something important I need to share with you." Monique's smile faltered slightly, her eyes narrowing as she watched him. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, sensing something was off. John continued, his tone calm but loaded with purpose. "Over the past few months, I've been facing some health challenges. At first, I thought it was just stress or overwork, but recently I've discovered that the truth is far more sinister." The crowd exchanged murmurs, confusion spreading across the room. Monique's smile froze, her fingers tightening around the stem of her champagne glass. John turned to a screen set up in the corner of the room and nodded to Ethan, who was standing nearby. The first video began to play. Monique appeared on the screen, her hand casually stirring a glass of water as she said, "It's almost too easy." Gasps rippled through the room. Monique's face went pale as the next video played, capturing her and Daniel discussing how to increase the dosage. "Soon, he won't even leave the bed," her voice echoed through the speakers. "John, Monique stammered, her voice rising. This isn't what it looks like. This is fake. But before she could say more, Ethan displayed the final damning evidence, the forged will. The room fell into a stunned silence as Monique's signature glared from the screen. Daniel took a step back, his face flushed with panic. I had nothing to do with this, he blurted, but his protests were drowned out by the crowd's outraged whispers. Monique's composure shattered. You can't believe this, John, she screamed, her voice hysterical. I love you. I would never. John's expression was cold, his voice cutting through her cries. You were going to kill me, Monique, and now everyone knows. Monique and Daniel stood frozen as security stepped forward. The facade they had built so carefully crumbled in an instant, leaving nothing but the cold, hard truth. The aftermath of the party unfolded swiftly. Police arrived that same evening, escorted by John's private security. Monique and Daniel, faces pale and stunned, were handcuffed and led away, their pleas for innocence drowned by the weight of undeniable evidence. The betrayal, once shrouded in secrecy, was now exposed to all. John stood silently in the grand hall as the last of the guests departed, his heart heavy with the pain of what he had uncovered. The woman he had loved and trusted above all else had conspired to end his life. Yet, amid the ache of betrayal, there was a flicker of gratitude, a light in the darkness that he owed entirely to Camille. The next morning, John found Camille in the kitchen, quietly organizing the silverware. She paused as he approached, her expression cautious. But John's voice, though weary, carried a note of sincerity. You saved my life, Camille, he said, his eyes meeting hers. You saw what I couldn't. I can never repay you for that. In the weeks that followed, John insisted Camille take on a larger role, entrusting her with managing the estate. He supported her in continuing her education and ensured she received the recognition she deserved. For the first time in years, the mansion was a place of peace. The story ended not in bitterness, but in renewal. As John and Camille stood together in the sunlight filtering through the mansion's grand windows, it was clear. This was a new beginning, built on trust and the quiet courage that had saved a life. Don't miss more heartwarming stories like this one. Subscribe now and join us on a journey of love, redemption, and powerful life lessons. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss an update.